The House will now come to order. Today, our very own Representative Armagost will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues and guests, good morning. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Mr. Schiebel, please call the roll.
Representatives Amabile, Armagost, Bacon, Byrd is present, Bockenfeld, Basenecker, Bottoms, Bradfield, Bradley, Catlin, Doherty, DeGraff, Degree Kennedy,
Here.
Dixon, Representative Dixon. Rep. Dixon's excused.
She's here.
Sorry. Duran. English. Epps. Evans. Frizzell. Froelich. Rep. Froelich's here. Garcia. Gonzalez Gutierrez. Hamrick. Hartsook. Herod. Holtorf. Rep. Holtorf is present. Judah. Joseph. Kipp. Leader. Lindsay. Linstead. Luck. Lukens. Lynch. Mabry. Marshall. Martinez. Representative Morrow is excused. McCormick. McLaughlin. Michelson Janae. Ortiz. Parenti.
Excused.
Rep. Parenti's excused. Puglisi. Ricks. Sharbini. Sirota. Snyder. Soper. Representative Soper.
Excused.
Rep. Soper's excused. Story. Taggart. Titone. Valdez. Velasco. Vigil. Weinberg.
Present.
Weissman. Wilford. Rep. Wilford's excused. Wilson. Winter. Woodrow. Young. And Madam Speaker.
With 60 present, 4 excused, and 0 absent, we have a quorum. And I'm sorry, 1 vacant. Representative Armagost.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Journal of Thursday, January 12th, 2023 be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
You have heard the motion that the journal be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just wanted to make a short announcement. Hopefully everybody has this in your email. You've hopefully seen from our nonpartisan Legislative Council staff that a series of informational trainings will be going on throughout the session. These are open for us, new and returning members. They're open for our aides, any interns we may have, and others. Full information is in your email, but the first of these is actually upcoming next week, Wednesday the 18th, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the Old State Library, which is the big room over that away. This one is sort of captioned Orientation to the Judicial Branch, our coordinate branch of government in Colorado. Will be headlined by Justice Gabriel of the Supreme Court, and he'll be talking about sort of inter-branch relations. Would encourage folks, especially new members, to attend next Wednesday at 8. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will have time for more announcements and introductions after the resolution today, but for now, the House will stand in recess for a moment while we wait for the Senate to join us.
Members, please take your seats. We're about to get started. The House will come back to order. Our next order of business is consideration of resolutions. Mr. Schiebel, please read the title of House Joint Resolution 1006.
House Joint Resolution 1006 by Representatives English and Epps, also Senators Coleman and Exum, concerning the commemoration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Representatives English and Epps. Representative English.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We move for the adoption of HJR 1006 and request that it be read at length.
Members, you have heard the motion. Mr. Schiebel, please read the title at length. Resolution at length.
Whereas the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15th, 1929, graduated from Morehouse College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948, graduated from Crozer Theological Seminary in 1951, and received a PhD from Boston University in 1955. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's faith, resiliency, and commitment to justice became known worldwide throughout his speeches, writings, and actions. And whereas Reverend Dr. King declared that the moral responsibility to aid the oppressed did not stop at the edge of his street, town, or state, when he wrote, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And whereas Reverend Dr. King, like thousands of other African Americans, withstood attacks on his home and family, among numerous other threats and setbacks, standing firm in his conviction that although the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. And whereas Reverend Dr. King embodied civil disobedience, he, along with others in the civil rights movement, created constructive tension by being intentionally nonviolent but direct, as well as urgent but strategic in their actions. This tension compelled meaningful negotiation with the white power structure of our country, without which true civil rights could never be achieved. The urgency required reflection of the assumption that progress towards equal rights was inevitable, and so assertive activism was unnecessary, confronting the myth that time will inevitably cure all ills. In a letter from Birmingham jail, Reverend Dr. King wrote that those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation, saying wait and asking African Americans to wait for courts or for minds to change on their own, was a continued miscarriage of justice. He wrote, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed." And whereas Reverend Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott, a 13-month protest beginning in 1955 against the segregated city bus lines, and whereas the Montgomery bus boycott led to the integration of the Montgomery city bus system and is widely credited as the beginning of the civil rights movement in America. And whereas in 1957, Reverend Dr. King was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization formed to provide leadership to the burgeoning civil rights movement. And whereas between 1957 and 1968, Reverend Dr. King spoke more than 2,500 times, wrote 5 books, as well as numerous articles, led protests, helped register African American voters, was arrested more than 20 times, was awarded 5 honorary degrees, was named Man of the Year by Time magazine, and became the symbolic leader of the African American community, as well as a world figure. And whereas on August 28, 1963, Reverend Dr. King directed the March on Washington, at which more than 200,000 Americans gathered in the name of equality and civil rights, and which culminated in Reverend Dr. King's historic I Have a Dream speech. And whereas the leadership of Reverend Dr. King was instrumental in bringing about landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited segregation in public accommodations and facilities and banned discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which eliminated remaining legal barriers to voting for disenfranchised African American voters. And whereas in 1964, Reverend Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his tireless and selfless work in the pursuit of justice for African Americans and other oppressed people in America. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's 13 years of nonviolent leadership ended abruptly and tragically when, on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's life and work continue to echo in our lives as we strive to reach the lofty goal he set, when he said, "Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty." And whereas the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day in Colorado was championed for 10 years by Representative Wellington and Wilma Webb, in the hope that acknowledgement of the holiday would demonstrate Colorado's commitment to confronting and ending racial injustices. In 1974, Representative Wellington Webb first introduced a resolution to acknowledge the holiday, and in 1975 introduced a bill to do the same. Although these efforts were initially unsuccessful, the work nevertheless continued. In 1985, Representative Wilma Webb championed the cause as the primary bill sponsor. On April 4th of that same year, Colorado Governor Dick Lamm signed the bill into law. And whereas Colorado's enactment of the holiday and the annual parade, emerging of the words march and parade, predated the federal holiday designation, and the first celebration in Colorado was on January 20th, 1986. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's birthday is a federal holiday in the United States and a state holiday in the state of Colorado, which is celebrated each year on the third Monday in January. And whereas on Monday, January 16th, 2023, we celebrate the 36th anniversary of Reverend Dr. King's holiday. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 74th General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the Senate concurring herein, that we, the members of the Colorado General Assembly, hereby encourage appropriate observances, ceremonies, and activities to commemorate the federal and state legal holiday honoring Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. throughout all cities, towns, counties, school districts, and local governments within Colorado.
Representative Epps.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Where I'm from, we refer to Dr. King as Martin Luther the King, and it is not lost on me the gravity of being able to speak to and about him in the moment that is, for me, my first opportunity to speak to this body in a formal manner. It's not lost on me that this day that we have an opportunity to commemorate is because of the work of folks who are in this chamber, who are hiding, but we see you clearly, and thank you. I had prepared remarks. Recent events of recent days have had me reconsider those. And in thinking about how we best honor Dr. King, there was a reference in the resolution, if you listened, you heard, to words that he wrote from in a letter from the Birmingham jail. Did you hear that? There was more to that letter. And because he wrote so much better than I ever could and what I could have prepared, I'm just going to read the excerpt of what he shared there by my way of tribute and thanks. I must confess that over the few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate who is more called to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I just can't agree with your methods or your direction. Who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. Who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient time. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And then he talks about capitalism. But on this day when we're honoring him, and I'm looking at the Webbs, my invitation is to consider that you all, when we walk through this building, you've seen his portrait. There aren't a lot of portraits and stained glass paintings of black folks in this building yet. There's some. But what there is in a body of 100 elected officials is a black caucus that is 11 members strong. How did we get there? Because of people like the Webbs. As I turn it over to my colleagues and think how grateful I am to be upright and to have lived so much longer than a man who was killed so young, I have to acknowledge a date that Martin Luther King and many of his supporters understood as well. Today is January 13th. And while many are standing, I see several of my sorors here, and I can't let this date pass in honoring King without acknowledging January 13th, because 110 years ago, soror, 22 black women at Howard University, their first public act as a sorority was not a social event, was not a tea, was not a party, though they did that too. Their first public act as a sorority was to march in a women's suffrage march. Their fathers were upset. Imagine you are a black woman in college 110 years ago. You've managed to get there, how it might have stressed out your family that you wanted to go march in a women's suffrage march. But the women who were hosting the march didn't want us there. And so there was division, and they marched anyway. And our founders of Soror Webb's organization, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, marched at the back of that march, marching for rights, for voting rights that weren't even being offered to us at that time. And so to be in a place 110 years later, in a caucus that is 11 deep, we hope we are making Dr. King proud, we hope we are making the Webbs proud, and we take from you the lesson that the 10 years you fought for something that should have been done right away, we understand that you did that 10-year fight without majorities of these sizes. You did it without a whole lot of folks who looked like you in the chamber. And you did it anyway. So how dare we who have such thoughtful colleagues, how dare we who have such numbers, and I don't just mean the political division, but thoughtful members on, sorry to say both sides of the aisle, but we spilled over a lot over there, but how dare we who have that capacity, how dare we who have 10 more of us who share these experiences do anything less than honor your spirit and his, and how dare we, for our convenience or political expediency or strategy, how dare we delay the timetable of another man's freedom? Thank you.
Representative English.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is an honor to be here today and stand before you and honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I just want to take a brief moment to honor the Webb family. But because he had a dream, we have the opportunity to stand here today in solidarity as a Colorado Black Legislative Caucus and lead the people of the state of Colorado. And because Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King blazed the trail for us, we are here and free to be who we are in the United States of America. And I am just humbled and filled with gratitude that I have this opportunity to stand here and share, as my colleague said, standing right up, unapologetically confident in the skin that I'm in today, and be a state representative, one of the best jobs in the state of Colorado, and even more honored to be the first Black woman to hold this seat and represent El Paso County, because Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream. Thank you.
Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first, I just want to acknowledge and thank my colleagues who are up here who shared words, the powerful words of Dr. King. I want to make clear to folks that as the chair of the Black Caucus, we do have the largest Black Caucus ever in the history of Colorado. And I want you all to see us standing here and our members from the Senate standing as well, and acknowledge the fact that the women, the Black women of the House and the Black men and women of the Senate have all blazed a path that is the first or historic and continues to fight for justice for the Black community. But none of this could have been done if it weren't for those giants, some very literal giants, whose shoulders we stand on. I want to acknowledge the former members of House District 8 who led the way and blazed the path for us to have this moment and honor today. Former Representative Mayor Wellington Webb, please stand. For 3 years, the Honorable Wellington Webb fought to pass the MLK resolution. And for 3 years, members of this body said no and refused to honor the legacy of Dr. King. But there was someone a little more tenacious, maybe even a little more convincing, that followed the Honorable Wellington Webb. And that is the Honorable former Representative from House District 8, Wilma Webb. Wilma, please stand. The Honorable Wilma Webb fought for 4 years, right in this body, to make sure that the honor of Dr. King was acknowledged right here in the House. And for 3 years, she was told no. She received death threats. She was removed from her seat on the Joint Budget Committee. And I'm proud to have been the only Black female to serve on the Joint Budget Committee since her legacy and tenure. And then finally, in that last year, the resolution was recognized, and we had the Dr. King holiday right here in the state of Colorado. I want to also acknowledge that Mrs. Coretta Scott King sat right over there in this body. And so as we think of the words of Dr. King, I want us to think beyond the dream, which is a speech that we all know and love, and look deeper into his work. Think about his words from the Birmingham jail. Think about his words on bringing together people beyond our color, but also those who fought for immigrants, for labor, for justice for every single person, education. Because the dream is not yet realized. We still have fight and work to do. And so as we go about our business for the next 100 and some days, I will ask that my colleagues, especially my good colleague who read the words from Denver, remind us of the words of Dr. King, so that the legacy is beyond just a day, but that his words fill the spirit of this body when we are debating the toughest issues, when we are debating the very freedoms of us all. So one more person I want to acknowledge in this chamber is Khadijah Haynes and the Haynes family. For those of you who all don't know the legacy of House District 8, the Haynes family are the ones who fought to end redlining in Denver and throughout the state of Colorado. If it was for not you, I would not be able to live in my neighborhood of Park Hill today. Thank you. And if it weren't for the legacy of the Webbs, I would not be able to stand here as an out and proud Black LGBT member because they brought that resolution to this body first. The fight for justice is a fight for us all. I look forward to the conversation today. I look forward to hearing your words today. And I know we will hear them again as we deliberate all of our very difficult bills in the days moving forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Ricks.
Madam Speaker, today I and the members of the Black Caucus rise to commemorate the life and legacy of the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King and the people he walked hand in hand with, including the late John Lewis and the great Rosa Parks, led a movement that undoubtedly helped a woman like me end up in a place like this, addressing you all under the gold dome. As a Black woman and the first African immigrant to serve here at the Colorado State Capitol, I look out at my colleagues today, and I'm proud to be a part of the most diverse caucus in state history. I can't help but recognize that our diversity and our strength embody what Dr. King fought so hard to bring front and center, and that is significant progress. As we work to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we can reflect on his words as a guiding light toward equity and justice. In a speech delivered in 1967, Dr. King discussed the concept of genuine equality and how we must continue to fight to ensure every person has access to real opportunities to succeed, earn a living wage, and achieve. Today, these themes ring true to many of us here. We're fighting for genuine equality. While we certainly have made progress as a body, as a state, and as a nation, there is work to be done. I, for one, am ready to honor heroes like Martin Luther King Jr. for fighting not only to drive out the destructive forces that hold our communities back, but to fight for justice and equality in Colorado so that every person, regardless of their race, income level, ethnicity, zip code, and immigration status, can not only live in peace, but truly thrive in our great state. One of the things, in 1956, Martin Luther King visited Colorado, and it was during that visit that a young Wilma Gerdine was playing the piano. He heard the words of Mahalia Jackson's song, "If I Can Help Somebody." We know that person today as the Honorable Wilma Webb. She was playing the piano that day in New Hope Baptist Church. Dr. King also marched with John Lewis, who turned 90. You probably heard him when he gave his presentation for the governor's inauguration, who's 90 years old today. We honor all these great people, the Honorable Wellington Webb, and all of the sacrifices that they have done to allow us to stand here today. And I'm so thankful that I'm to be a part of this body and to do the work that we're doing here in Colorado.
Representative Joseph.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is such an honor to serve with you.
It is an honor to serve with you.
And it is also an honor to serve with all of you. And today, as I am thinking about commemorating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what does that day mean to me? As the first Haitian American from Boulder, Colorado, and you've heard today, there are so many firsts. To me, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his legacy is about love. Love for one another, love for our neighbor, love for our community, and it's about inclusion. Again, as the first Haitian American from Boulder, I don't think it would have been possible had it not been for love and also hard work. The hard work of Dr. King, the hard work of Mayor Webb, the hard work of Representative Wilma Webb. Again, that's why we're here today. When you look around, you think of the diversity of all of us here together today, it is because of love. Just remember, with love, everything is possible. We are here together in this body as a group, working together, and as you consider legislation, consider the love that we have for one another and also how we want to represent all the people of Colorado and bringing all of us along together. Thank you.
Representative, great. Thank you. Any further discussion on our resolution? Representative Bottoms.
It is an honor to serve with you, Madam Speaker,
And an honor to serve with you.
and also an honor to serve with everybody here. I've been a representative for a hot minute. That's not what I'm speaking. I've been a pastor for 32 years, and Dr. Martin Luther King has been a hero of mine for my whole life. I have pored over his speeches. I have pored over his letters. I have looked at, and this is the most that I've looked at, is I've looked at his sermons. Sometimes in the mix of everything, we forget that Dr. King was a pastor first. His father was a pastor, and his grandfather was a pastor. And so as a pastor, this is an impassioned thing for me. And I've pored over all of the things that he said for years and years. And he stands in equality with Dietrich Bonhoeffer and William Wilberforce. These guys were amazing men of God that challenged the status quo and challenged, and this is the thing that gets missed sometimes, they challenged how the church was addressing them. I have found when I decided to run as a representative that there were a lot of people in the church that didn't like that idea. I didn't know that. Nobody told me ahead of time that pastors were going to attack me for this. But I believe I'm doing the same way Dr. Martin Luther King said this many times. I believe that what I am doing as a pastor standing here is because that God has put this in my heart and he's called me to do this. And Dr. King said that more times than you can count. That he knew he was called, and he was called by God to do this. That the things that he says over and over and over that these things came from the Bible, that they came from the Spirit of God, and that he was continuing with the message and the truth of who Jesus Christ is. The letter that's been mentioned here in 1964, Dr. King wrote from a jail in Birmingham. And I would suggest, we've heard different quotes from this, read the entire letter. There's some very powerful stuff throughout this letter. He says, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord," he quotes scripture constantly through everything he does, far beyond the boundaries of their own hometown. And just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. And the statement that was read earlier, I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. He is seeing this as a continuation of the gospel. The gospel of freedom to Dr. Martin Luther King was not something that was ethereal, that he pulled out of human nature or out of his own mind or heart. This comes from Scripture, that freedom is a Jesus thing. It's not a people thing. There's no society in all of history that has ever come up with the idea of people being free. Nobody comes up with that. That's Jesus that came up with that. And he establishes this over and over in Scripture, and Martin Luther King quotes this often. His heart was service to Jesus Christ. And even in the human frailties that make us up, and that Dr. King also had, he understood that grace carries the day, and that Jesus' truth carries the day. One of the most impactful speeches ever, obviously, is I Have a Dream. I think that speech, for me, it's my favorite speech I've ever heard. But I think that speech changed not just the United States, but it changed the entire world. That the things he said there, and sometimes we also miss the fact that how he got to that place was divinely ordained. There was a lot of people fighting the cause of civil rights, but God elevated Dr. Martin Luther King, and I believe because of the providentialness of God, I believe that God was planning the I Have a Dream speech long before Dr. King ever got there. But God knew, and I believe strongly in this philosophy, God knew he could trust him to carry it through, to walk strong in the face of complete evil. You think about what he was fighting, and he was fighting it from everybody. He was fighting it from the government. The government wants to try to segregate. Dr. King said, no, we're not going to segregate. That's the opposite of what we're going to do. The government tried to shut him down. The church tried to shut him down. And he stood strong, saying, no, I know what I am here for. And that's what we are trying to accomplish today. He says in his speech, but there's something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. He reiterated this over and over and over, that the attitude of the heart will determine what you're doing and actually can hurt what you're doing. Wrongful deeds is a moral issue. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. If we can capture that in America, we can accomplish a lot. This is about in our soul. The marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed the Negro community, must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, that they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. He went on to say in the dream statements, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And I pray for that constantly today, that we can capture what he said. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with this governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Atlanta, in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls, my sisters and brothers. We have lost sight of this, and we have gone back to the opposite of that today. The ending of his speech was one of the most moving sentiments, and this is what we hear the most. He says, and when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black and white, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing, in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. From the letter in Birmingham, he says, you express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. One may ask, now can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are 2 types of laws, just and unjust. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, and this is important, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is unjust or just? A law is a man-made code. That's what we do in this house. A man-made code that squares with the moral law or with the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. He's talking about the Bible. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul. It's a spiritual issue first and damages the personality. Hence, segregation is not only political, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and awful. He acknowledges over and over that Jesus is the point. He is the reason. He's where all this comes from. He says, what is not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate
Representative
you.
Bottoms, you have 1 minute remaining.
Pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. He says, here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. So help me God. He finishes the Birmingham jail letter. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is the best in the American dream, for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, therefore bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy. He was much about the Constitution, the democracy of America, which has dug deep by the founding fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of understanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative DeGraff.
Madam Speaker, it is a privilege to serve with you.
And a privilege to serve with you.
And to my colleagues, it is a privilege to serve with you. As we honor Martin Luther King Jr. today, I reflect on the idea that there are times in the nation when God raises up a person, never a perfect person, but one that he has called, to challenge the morality of a nation and remind it of its roots. We see this throughout history. Like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I believe God raised up Moses to call the Israelites to return to the God of their fathers, leave the bondage of Egypt, and follow him to a better land and a better life. Like Dr. King, I believe God raised up the Old Testament prophets to urge repentance and a return to their God. Like Dr. King, I believe in the fullness of time, God raised up Jesus of Nazareth to preach the good news that the time of redemption had come, and then offer himself as a payment for all mankind's wrongdoing. Nearly 2 millennia and 10 years later, Abraham Lincoln was elevated to wipe out the stain of slavery of our land. Time and again, throughout human history, God has raised up leaders, some worthy on the face of it, others apparently unlikely, to bless nations, restore values, and bring healing. Many painful but powerful words have been spoken today from the legacy of Dr. King. And where there is great pain, there is also the urge to lash out. Yet Dr. King believed in the principles of the American founding. He maintained that we will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation because the goal of America is freedom. Dr. King believed that the founders had set the nation on the right course. He did not reject the principles of our nation because contradictions existed. Instead, he hoped that the racial groups would put aside their differences and acknowledge the principles that unite all Americans. As America drifts from the ideals of the founders, I stand with Dr. King in believing that the principles of this American founding are as relevant and liberating in 2023 as they were in 1776, in 1863, or 1963. May God continue to shine his light on Dr. King, his family, and the great nation he helped forge. And so with many of you, I believe God raised up Martin Luther King Jr. to preach healing and restoration rather than division and retribution to a nation desperately in need of it. I bless his memory for that. I recognize that the memorials we offer here in the well of the House from time to time should praise the departed rather than politicize the living. And so, Madam Speaker, I rise to join this body in remembering and celebrating the life and legacy of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. May God continue to shine his light on Dr. King, his family, and the great nation. Thank you.
Minority Leader Lynch.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And what a beautiful day we have today to celebrate a wonderful man. I will tell you, my caucus has some issues with some of the words in the resolution, but that is the way we do business in this building. But today is today, I believe, to honor folks like the Webbs, who truly are an embodiment of Martin Luther King's vision, and they lead the way and have brought that to the state of Colorado. And if you don't mind, let's recognize them one more time. Thank you.
Additional comments. Representative Judah.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, Madam Speaker, I apologize. I want you to look at the women behind me. Many of us, if not all, have made history in our elections. While I do not identify as Black, I am the first Muslim and first Arab woman to be elected. And as such, and I've said this before, but to our new members, the Black Caucus and I have an unfortunate kinship. But one of the members reminded me that we also have a fortunate kinship. So it is an honor to be a member of the Black Caucus. On Monday, I also had the honor of standing up there and giving the opening prayer of the 74th General Assembly. And I really wanted to highlight us coming together under this dome whose foundation is built on our democracy. But more so, I wanted to stress that each of us is here because we believe in that democracy and that this building is a beacon of justice. And every single one of us took an oath to defend the highest document in our land, and we pledge our allegiance to that flag every single day. I don't want any of us to forget, that Dr. Martin Luther King revolutionized what it meant to be unapologetic about holding up a beacon of justice. And as such, not only members of this General Assembly, but every single person in our human race has an obligation to hold up this beacon of justice and the principles that he gave his life to defend. Every single one of us, regardless of how you identify, can relate to his work, can relate to what he stood for. And that is what we need to be present with and that we need to have at the center of our work. Thank you.
Representative Velasco, Mabry. And Representative Velasco.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is an honor to serve with you.
And an honor to serve with you.
I am honored to stand here today with fellow members of the Latino Caucus in support of this resolution and to honor the legacy of Dr. King. And I also would like to acknowledge the foundational work of Wilma and Wellington Webb. And thank Representatives Herod, Ricks, English, and Epps and Judah for their great remarks today. I think it's important for all of us to recognize that while it is fitting and proper that we honor the legacy of Dr. King, that in his life, he was persecuted. And of course, we know that because he was assassinated, but it's also important to remember that he was investigated by our own government for his work organizing to improve the lives of people in poverty and people of color. I appreciate that so many have quoted from his I Have a Dream speech. I think almost all of us in this room have read that speech and cherish the words of Dr. King on that historic day. But I want to call attention to a specific passage from that speech. Dr. King reminded us on that day that we can never be satisfied as long as Black Americans are the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police violence. Just yesterday, a 31-year-old young man named Keenan Anderson, a high school teacher, called for help. He called for help, and he was killed. He was tased 7 times. He was killed. And before I move on, I just think we should take a moment of silence to think about the passing of Mr. Anderson.
Moment of silence is granted. Representative Mabry.
Thank you. I bring this up to remind us that the work of Dr. King is not done, and indeed we cannot be satisfied. I would like to close by pointing out to the work that Dr. King was doing in the lead up to his death. In the weeks leading up to his assassination, Dr. King had been hard at work organizing a new march on Washington, known as the Poor Person's Campaign. He was organizing with janitors. He often spoke in the lead up of that campaign about the horrors of poverty. He reminded us that as long as there is poverty in the world, no man can be rich, even if he has billions of dollars. He also reminded us that the time is always right to do what is right. In 1967, Dr. King stated that the time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. Let us here in this body dedicate ourselves to doing that work. The time is always right to do what is right. Thank you.
Representative Velasco.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to serve with you.
And an honor to serve with you.
I am a New American, a very proud New American, the first Latina to be elected from the Western Slope. And I am here to honor and thank Reverend Dr. King. He fought for civil rights for all, that we don't discriminate against place of origin, which includes the language that we speak. Reverend Dr. King gave us protections to language access, and we must keep working together to remove barriers of access to participation in this people's house, because we know that we are stronger together and that democracy is the path to freedom.
Thank you. Representative Weissman.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, there have been some tough acts to follow up here. I am grateful that I'm not going to have to try to follow the words of my colleague from Northeast Denver, Representative Bacon. So I think new members, you'll learn that you don't want to be in that position in here. I wanted to share and reflect on some words, perhaps not surprisingly, from the I Have a Dream speech of 1963. I think not surprising that a lot of us are tapping into that. It's probably the most powerful 16 or 17 minutes of oratory in all of the 20th century. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. We've come a long way since the day in 1963, which is almost 60 years ago exactly this year, when those words rung out over the mall in Washington, D.C. And I think a lot of progress has been made since then. And yet, not all of the darkness of that desolate valley has been banished. Daily, we just heard about this, some of our fellow Coloradans and fellow Americans find themselves living in that shadow. The warmth of that sunlit path has not yet reached every corner of our society. Its beams fall on more people than they did 60 years ago, yes, and that is what the struggle has been all about. But daily, some of our fellow Coloradans and fellow Americans go through their lives without feeling the warmth of that sunlit path on their faces and instead experiencing the chill of injustice that pervades when clouds of discrimination roll in and block out the sun. Compared to what Dr. King called the sweltering summer of 1963 and other such sweltering summers in the peak of the civil rights era, I do think that more people stand on solid rock today. And yet, the unstable quicksands of racial injustice still shift and swirl and threaten to swallow some of our fellow Coloradans and fellow Americans without notice, and in some cases, fatally. So because the dream of 1963 is not yet fully achieved, Dr. King's reminder of the fierce urgency of now has particular relevance for us in this legislature. Dr. King and other leaders of the civil rights era battled problems as long as the history of our country and as deep as the roots of human nature. Those problems were and remain today bigger than even the most sweeping legislative enactments can fully address. But also, let's not forget, part of the March on Washington to dramatize a shameful condition, as Dr. King put it, was to pressure legislatures, and specifically Congress, to act. Although legislative bodies alone may not be able to solve all of the most grievous issues bearing down on our society, we here, are not excused from action for that reason. As we heard, the March on Washington and the activism that preceded and followed it had everything to do with the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Those enactments were epical changes and had a lot to do with changing desolate valleys to sunlit paths and quicksands to solid rock. And yet the work is not done. Personally, when I see the letter, or at least the spirit of the laws of 1964 and 1965, being taken up proudly and extended and modernized for our times and our struggles today, I am at or near my most proud of this country. And on the other hand, when I see the letter or the spirit of those laws departed from and derogated from, I begin to despair that we are forgetting the lessons of many painful chapters of our history and what those chapters should be teaching us. We grapple with many issues here in our Colorado General Assembly. Sometimes we tackle a challenge that can be substantially addressed with one well-crafted bill in one session, but usually not. More often, we inherit work and challenge and struggle from those who came before us, and thank you, Mayor Webb and Representative Webb, for being here this morning. For a time, we carry the torch of hopeful progress, and whether in issues of racial justice or economic sufficiency or decent housing, all of which Dr. King struggled for, among many other issues. For a time, we try to tend that flame that we carry to keep it from going out on our watch, and if we do well, to help it burn a little more brightly. And then whether it's term limits or election outcomes or anything else that happens in life, our time comes to pass the torch. So colleagues, because of our own unlimited and uncertain time here to lean into the exigencies bearing down on our constituents who send us here and on whose behalf we work, and more importantly, because of the underlying exigencies that people in our state face, when I'm here in this House, I often think about the fierce urgency of now. And I want to encourage all of us to do the same. Sometimes we say we're all in the same boat. We've all heard that. But I think a truer statement is that we are all in the same storm, but navigating the choppy waters in very different boats. Some may be as solid as a yacht with a GPS system and a month's worth of food on board. Some may be a couple of boards lashed together with some rope in the open sea, and everything in the middle of those two. It's only natural that our perspective is informed by our own personal experience. But we are here also to be informed and motivated and galvanized by others' experiences too, particularly others whose paths have been less fortunate than our own. So again, in our work this year, I ask that we remember the fierce urgency of now. Dr. King recognized that in many respects, justice delayed is justice denied. And in recognizing this too in our work, we honor his monumental legacy. Thank you.
Representative Michelson-Janae.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you so much to the Black Caucus for really bringing forward a meaningful and heartfelt celebration of Dr. King. I will say, as a member of the Jewish community, Dr. King was a hero for the Jewish community and continues to be a hero for the Jewish community. When the opportunities availed themselves, we stood with Dr. King and we marched with Dr. King. And Dr. King lifted us as he lifted you. And I bring a quote forward from the ACLU, quoting Dr. King as saying, "Legally, constitutionally, or otherwise, the state certainly has no such right to interfere in an individual's exercise of religion." As a Jewish member, I stand here before you and remind us that this body is not a church. It is a legislative body where we are here to stand and work together and represent all the people of our state. Sometimes we may lose ourselves in our words and forget that there are others who practice faith differently than we do. And faith is faith. Let us honor and recognize that those faiths still elevate us. And Dr. King laid the groundwork for us to be able to stand here as Jewish people, as Muslim people, as Christian people, and others. We stand here together and we work together because of Dr. King. And I urge us to remember that as we toil in this well. Thank you.
Assistant Majority Leader Bacon.
Thank you, members. I want to thank you all for your words today and for your grace and kindness in receiving our resolution. I'm inspired to get to know many of you. You might hear my stories of being a preacher's kid growing up, so bear with me there. But you might also hear the stories of my elders and some of the conversations we had over dinner. You know, it was really important for us, and thank you for welcoming our representatives, the Webbs, for joining us today. It was important that they be here to recognize the generational work that has gone into not only the work that we do in this building, but the raising of the people that you see before you. There are people who are still living that came from a time in which their individuality was stripped from them and instead they were saw only as Black. I shared with many of you a couple of years ago that my own mother graduated from a segregated high school in 1970 in Mississippi. And so I'm blessed to still have her with me, but when I ask her about her childhood, these are the things that we talk about. And that's also why she is so proud of all of us that we are standing here. Because for her, and like Dr. King said, it was something that they could only dream about. So I want to just talk about Dr. King's dream. You know, he gave that speech that way because, again, it was something they could only dream about. And the civil rights movement was intentionally meant to be an awakening. There were things that people saw for the first time, like hoses put on human beings, dogs put on human beings, churches being bombed. He latched on to the dream because he needed to build tools, times, moments, people to hold on to be able to see it with his eyes so that there would be a reality. He spoke to it in a different speech. We talked about the letters today, and I have a dream, but he also had the speech that we call the mountaintop speech, if you all remember. First, he said, I want America to commit to what it says on paper, that we hold these truths to be self-evident. And he also said, I may not get there with you, because he was still dreaming. And while we are standing here as evidence of what's at that mountaintop, we have to remember the awakening. We have to remember what we've seen, what we have experienced. We have to be believed in those experiences. Because the opposite of being awake is to go back to sleep. And we cannot tolerate that. If we are committed, we all have a role to play in the dream becoming a reality. And so again, I want to recognize our elders for enduring the worst type of hate, but being there for us when we traverse a new type. And we know that there is a reality that we can call on people in ways that we maybe weren't able to call on them in 1968. And that is our expectation as we stand here under this dome. So I ask all of us to live and act with our eyes open, to lean on the things that we know are possible, but also to remember where we never want to be again. We are all committed to stand in that, but please recognize that we carry the weight of our ancestors. We carry the weight of supporting our communities. We also share in asking of carrying the weight of doing the work so that we can share these stories, that it's not ours alone. And that's what we will ask for you all as a commitment on this day in which we remember Dr. King. So thank you all for your time this morning. And thank you to our Senate colleagues for being here. Thank you to all of you, no matter where you sit, for your commitment to this. And for what it's worth, you all know where to find me. I'm always great for coffee, lunch, pastries, or something from Louisiana. So thank you all.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, is there any objection to a voice vote? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. House Joint Resolution 1006 is adopted. Co-sponsors, Mr. Schiebel, please open the machine. Please close the machine. The House will now stand in recess for purposes of hearing from our Senate colleagues. Members, ask that you remain in your seats. This is now our opportunity to hear from our Senate colleagues on House Joint Resolution 1006. Senator Buckner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an honor to be back in the House.
It is an honor to have you back in the House.
Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech motivated society for positive change and protection of African Americans in legislation and all possible spheres of life. The speech is the most famous in the 20th century. Back then, over a half century ago, 55 years ago, African Americans were only beginning to move into neighborhoods, colleges, and careers once reserved for whites only. Sounds like another world, doesn't it? But I was living in that world. Some of you in this room weren't even born yet. I served in this chamber for 5 years before going to the Senate, and many of you remember the stories I told. I told those stories about my traumatic experiences with racism. I needed to let you know what discrimination felt like and how it affected me and every other person of color. The United States is a very different place than it was back in 1968 when I was in college. But we still have a long way to go. We all profess that we want to trust and treat our fellow man with kindness, fairness, and dignity. We all profess to want to make a positive difference. But I think we could agree that we have a long way to go. We also do not want to go backwards into those past decades. There needs to be change. Every legislator who ran for office this year said, I want to work across the aisle. I want to make a difference for every constituent in my House district. What makes me work so hard for legislation in Colorado that makes a positive difference in everyone's life? You know why? It's the Martin Luther King in me. Why did I sponsor the Crown Act? Because I wanted to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles. Why? It's the Martin Luther King in me. Why do I reach out to everyone in this building to have you co-sponsor or understand why I'm running certain legislation that will help every student get a better education, to help everyone feel like they are a first-class citizen? Why do I do that? It's the Martin Luther King in me. Why do I not give up hope when it still hurts me to my heart that my grandchildren are discriminated against? It's the Martin Luther King in me. Everyone professes that they want to have peace amongst people of color, of all colors, and the poor. I think every one of you has the Martin Luther King in you. The Martin Luther King in me believes that change is coming. I will not give up hope. I pray it's not another 55 years before we see more differences, because I will not give up hope. I will not let Wilma and Wellington Webb down for all the work you've done because of the Martin Luther King in me. So, I don't understand how anyone can object to unity and peace, love, and racial equality, because God created us all, and we all have the Martin Luther King in all of us to make this world a better place. Thank you.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for allowing the Black Caucus and the Latina Caucus to sit and stand behind you. That's what access looks like, and that's what Dr. Martin Luther King was all about. Also want to acknowledge the Honorable Wilma Webb and Mayor Wellington Webb for all of their hard work in our city and in our nation, and to my colleagues and to my friends in the House and in the Senate, good morning. We stand before you because we're here celebrating the House Joint Resolution 10006. This is something that I've been doing since I was elected, and it's always a special opportunity for me to stand and acknowledge the achievements and the accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King. He had a speech, and one of his speeches was talking about how long, not long. And I can tell you my journey has been long.
It started with my ancestors on that slave ship. That slave ship came all the way over here to the United States, and my ancestors were sold as property. How long? It's been a mighty long journey for me to be able to stand in front of you in the full Senate and the House to be able to acknowledge Dr. Martin Luther King. It's been a long road, and it has not been easy. We live in Colorado, and we know that we have potholes. And the journey for all of us to be standing here, we had to navigate that road, that journey. You've heard a lot of people talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, about his achievements and his accomplishments. And I'm not going to talk about that much because I feel like I've inherited his spirit to be a champion and an advocate for the underserved, for those who are on the margins of society. I feel like I've inherited that speech. I have a dream. So I'm here to talk about his death, because his death is what has activated all of us to live his principles. It was that bullet. That bullet went through his cheek, severed it, ended up landing in his spinal. He was rushed to the hospital. You all have seen the photo of him being on the balcony, doing work for laborers, for workers who handle our trash. He was doing good work, and someone had a gun. And it was one of those pump rifles. He cocked it or put it forward, put the bullets, it was a 2-bullet chamber there, and cocked it back up. It had a little camera on there where he could kind of zoom in. He wasn't in close proximity. But he used the gun to kill the king. The man with the gun that had a bullet. And from his death, it shocked the world. It shocked the nation. It shocked me as a young girl. Our community mourned. We grieved because we didn't know how to navigate a life without having him being in leadership. But what happened is so many other people took up where Martin left off. And so the people that you see behind me and the people who are standing before me, you are the legacy and the champion of Martin's dream. I know for me, I'm not going to let his dream die. It's too very important. And we all want equity and justice for everyone. We're not trying to get something that no one else has. We want parity. We want equality. We want fairness in every corner of our state, in every nation, and around the world. And we want to do it peacefully. We want to do it in love. And that starts with our own individual behavior. It starts with our actions. It starts with our speech. So we always need to be mindful of the things that we say and how we walk. So members, I'm so very honored to be able to stand here to commemorate the life and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, because I have inherited his legacy. We all have. And I will not stop. I will continue until I'm no longer on this earth. And so I'm hoping that you all will join me in his fight, in his promise, in his principles, that we will keep marching on no matter how long.
Senator Exum.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And after that, with Senator Fields, let the House say amen.
Amen.
Thank you. The spirit of, before I get to my prepared remarks, I want to share just a quick story. I've shared this before, but because of the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr., 1974, when I joined the Colorado Springs Fire Department, and one of the white firefighters made a statement that he didn't want to sleep in the same bed as black firefighters because he thought all black firefighters were dirty. And because of the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr., every time I got promoted from inspector to lieutenant to captain to battalion chief, someone came up to me and said, "You only got that promotion because you're black." And because of the spirit of Martin Luther King, I was able to continue in fighting on. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 abolished literacy tests and poll taxes designed to disenfranchise African-American voters and gave the federal government the authority to take over voter registration in counties with a pattern of persistent discrimination. The law covered many pages, said President Johnson before signing the bill, but the heart of the act is plain. Wherever, by clear, objective standards, states and counties are using regulations or laws or tests to deny the right to vote, then they will be struck down. Dr. King called the law a great step forward in removing all the remaining obstacles to the right to vote. But in 2013, the Supreme Court decision in Shelby County versus Holder gutted the major part of the Voting Rights Act, making it easier for states to begin passing voter suppression laws. Since 2013, several states have taken advantage of this by passing laws for the purpose of making it harder for people to vote, by imposing new regulations and restrictions on voter registration, eliminating polling locations, cutting back on early voting, reducing voting hours. Over the last year, especially since 2020 election, we've seen 19 states pass 34 new voter suppression laws, including one law which criminalizes and punishes people who give food and water to people waiting in line to vote. So these voter suppression laws, which disproportionately affects voters of color, make it harder to register to vote and also eliminates voting locations, which creates long lines of people waiting to vote at few polling places which remain, and then also punish people who give food for water to those who wait in line to vote. That's not right. That's not right at all. Dr. King were alive today, would be very upset to see that. That's why I'm happy to be living in Colorado, where we have one of the best and most secure voting systems in the nation. We have a good voting system here in Colorado, which is why, on Martin Luther King Day especially, we should commit ourselves to protecting it. We should follow the example of Dr. King and make sure that everyone is able to vote and can vote as easily as possible. God bless you. Thank you.
Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, good morning. There we go. How y'all doing? It is still morning. I was just double checking. I want you to know I did ask the Speaker for permission for call and response, and I know our good pastor, Reverend from District 15, El Paso, knows all about that, so call and response. Colleagues, today as we gather to commemorate the life and legacy of Dr. King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I want to take a moment to reflect on the progress that we have made as a state and a nation, and the work that still lies ahead of us. Dr. King's message of equality, justice, and nonviolence resonates deeply with the values that we hold dear as Coloradans. His legacy continues to inspire us to work towards a more just and equitable society for all. In Colorado, we have taken important steps towards achieving these goals through legislation that promotes equity and inclusion, some of which you've heard. For example, last year we passed Senate Bill 139, which officially recognizes Juneteenth as a state holiday. This bill not only honors the contributions of African Americans to our state's and nation's history, but it also serves as a reminder of the ongoing struggle for racial justice. Additionally, we've passed more legislation, but however, we must acknowledge that there is still much work to be done. Racism and discrimination still exists in our state and our nation, and we must continue to fight against them in all forms. We must also work to address the underlying systems of oppression that perpetuate these injustices. As Dr. King once said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We must continue to bend that arc by enacting policies and legislation that promote equity and inclusion for all Coloradans. Let us honor Dr. King's legacy by committing ourselves to the ongoing struggle for equality, justice, and nonviolence. We must work towards creating a Colorado and a nation where everyone has the opportunity to live up to their full potential, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. I'd like to also acknowledge our Black leaders because as long as we continue to celebrate their names, they will live eternally. Last year, we lost Senator Gloria Tanner. We lost Representative Hugh McKean and many others. So we call those names that we've lost and those who live. Again, to the good representative from El Paso District 15, those of us who grew up in church know this has been a long resolution recognition. But if you grew up in church, you'd be in church until 3 o'clock in the morning, so I'm almost finished, Madam Speaker. Call and response. Do you know, I'm asking the question, do you know how to identify a historically Black community in any city in America? Y'all supposed to say how. Then you say, you find MLK Boulevard. So I was blessed to grow up in a community where there was one. On that street, there was a school. It was a school that had a church attached to it. It was Union Baptist Church. Those of you who served with me before knew that I had gotten kicked out of every public school, and there was only 2 options. It was either go to a juvenile program or a private school. So I got a scholarship to go to a church called Union Baptist on MLK Boulevard. Some tall, amazing, good-looking brother walked in one day and said, "I'm the mayor of Denver. My name is Wellington Webb." He was my Obama. For those of you who understand that reference, my son has never known a time, my daughter have never known a time where we didn't have a Black president in the history of the country. When I grew up, that was a reality, and so when he walked into my classroom, he let me know it was possible for me to be something more. Also recognizing Representative Wilma Webb. Hope she doesn't mind this, but we call her Grandmother Webb. She opens up, you know you've made it if she's opened up her home for you for a glass of lemonade and words of wisdom. Wisdom that has gotten us through being in a position that she understands because of all she's been able to accomplish. And lastly, I'd just like to recognize as I close, that's what we say in church, I promise, the first time. I want to recognize someone who's also been recognized here, and her name is Khadijah Haynes. You know, many of you have supported me. I lost my mother in January last year. But in Khadijah Haynes, I gained another, and so many others. She wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her mama, who we call Mama Jo Haynes, Anna Jo Haynes, which in the state of Colorado we wouldn't have early childhood education, the foundation that begins all the discussions we have here in this chamber and the other chamber. So thank you so much for all you've done as well. We thank you for the opportunity to be able to share. We thank you for standing with us. And we ask that you continue to stand with us. We might not always agree, but one thing that Dr. King believed in was conversation. It's easy to meet with people that you agree with. It's hard to meet with people you disagree with and have those tough conversations for the betterment of the people in the state of Colorado. Thank you for acknowledging this on this day, and thank you for acknowledging this belief for the remainder of the session.
Thank you. Members, we will allow a few moments for all of you to greet and welcome our guests today. Thank you. Members, the House will come back to order. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the state of judiciary will take place now. So at this time, I move that the House stand in recess until after the joint session.
Seeing no objection, the House will stand in recess until after the joint session. Members, the joint session will now come to order. Senate Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the morning roll call of the Senate be made the Senate roll call of the joint session.
If there is no objection, the morning roll call of the Senate will be made the Senate roll call for the joint session. House Majority Leader Duran.
Madam Speaker, members, I move that the morning roll call of the House be made the House roll call of the joint session.
If there is no objection, the morning roll call of the House will be made the House roll call for the joint session. A quorum is present. As is customary, it is my privilege and honor to present the gavel to the President of the Senate with the request that he preside over the proceedings.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the Joint Committee composed of Senators Marchman and Gardner and Representatives Doherty, Mabry, and Evans escort the Chief Justice into the House chamber? Chief Sergeant Judson. The joint session will stand in a brief recess. The joint session will come back to order. Looks like our committee is no longer lost. Chief Sergeant of the House, Judson. It is my pleasure and honor to present to you the Honorable Brian D. Boatwright, Chief Justice of the State of Colorado.
Speaker McCluskey, Senator President Fenberg, distinguished members of the House and Senate. Each year in September, judicial officers from around the state, magistrates, county court judges, district court judges, appellate judges, and even some trial court judges come together for 3 days to receive training and exchange ideas. During this year's conference, I had the opportunity to address all of the judicial officers in the state. I asked them to think back to when they first decided they wanted to become judicial officers. I asked them why. Why did you want to become a judicial officer? And we had the ability to immediately look at their responses. The top answer was to help people, followed by a desire to make a difference, and third, to serve the community. While there were a lot of ways to express their why, the overarching themes reflect a genuine desire to serve our communities because they truly care about the people who come into their court. Every day around the state, in every court, our judicial officers take the bench committed to uphold the rule of law. We handle over 500,000 cases every year in 70 different courthouses throughout the state. We have approximately 400 trial court judges and magistrates presiding over cases from small claims to first-degree murder cases. The criminal cases make up about 50% of the cases and frankly garner most of the headlines. But from my experience as a trial court judge, every day our judges are making decisions about families, children, our elderly, small businesses, and the important topic of water. Every case we handle affects people, and that's why having judges who care and want to serve is critical. In my 2 years as Chief Justice, I've received calls and letters asking me to intervene in cases. Parties to cases and even members of the public call me to tell me to take a judge off a case, or how to handle a specific case, or to undo a judge's ruling. They forget or don't understand that judges are independent constitutional officers, just like you all are. In other words, I don't have the authority over a specific case until it comes to our court on appeal. I do not have any control over a judge's docket or case management decisions. But let me tell you how we are organized. The Supreme Court, as the head of the judicial branch, has authority over the practice of law. We also have administrative authority over the branch, which includes approximately 4,000 employees. Our judges are appointed by a merit selection system. Briefly, each judicial district, of which there are 22 and soon to be 23 districts, has a nominating commission of 7 people, 4 of which are non-lawyers. When we have a judicial opening, the nominating commission reviews applications, conducts interviews, and then selects 2 or 3 applicants to send to the governor for his selection. Political affiliation is not disclosed in the application process, and in my experience, it is not a consideration for the nominating commission. The governor then has 15 days to appoint one of the candidates nominated to the commission. A judge appointed by the governor then stands for an initial retention election after serving 2 years, and a retention election for each subsequent term, which varies depending on the length of the office, from 4 to 10 years. Our system of selecting, evaluating, and retaining judges is the best in the country. And I'll give you 2 examples why. First, when we have a vacancy in our trial court or appellate courts, our Constitution requires that it be filled within 45 days. In the federal system, vacancies are sometimes not filled for months or even years due to the politics inherent in that system. Second, of the current 7 justices on the Supreme Court, 3 of us were appointed by a Republican governor to the trial court, and then 3 of us were later appointed by a Democrat governor to the Supreme Court. As you can see, one goal of merit selection is to depoliticize the judiciary, and I think that demonstrates its success. I want to now turn to a topic that I dedicated much time to in my last State of the Judiciary address. 2 years I stood before you at a time when our branch was the subject of public allegations of misconduct. At that time, I, on behalf of the Supreme Court and the entire branch, committed to thorough and transparent investigations, and we have lived up to those commitments. In so doing, we asked for the help of several of you here today and members of the executive branch in selecting not only the investigators for the allegations, but also defining the scope of the investigations. The investigations were completed last summer, and the results are posted in their entirety on the court's website. If you've not read them, I urge you to do so. But today, I do not want to dwell on the past. Instead of treading back through history, I want to tell you what we learned and what we're doing in the future. As I stand before you today, I'm excited and energized by the meeting of the minds and the hearts of the judicial branch. We are reflecting, learning, acting, and committing to a future that supports our conviction to assure the branch is a great place for our employees to work, provides the best service to the state of Colorado, and maintains systems to enhance public trust. As a result of the engaged participation of the branch's leadership and staff, we have 3 strategic priorities for our emerging future. First, we're improving our operations to better serve Colorado. We are building operational excellence and strong oversight into our business operations. As such, the public and you will have confidence in our business-related decisions. Second, we are empowering our employees. We commit to making the branch a place where employees and staff feel engaged and empowered. We recognize the importance of having a sense of deep connection to our organization's purpose and having employees know their contributions are making a difference to those we serve. And third, we are listening to our stakeholders. We continue to have our ears wide open and are building a continuous, welcoming, and safe feedback loop with our staff and our stakeholders. To our staff, to you, we hear you, and we are taking your feedback and communication seriously. In the spirit of looking forward and improving our workplace and operations, we ask the investigators to make concrete recommendations for improving our operations and our culture. Former U.S. Attorney Bob Troyer was the lead on the first investigation. Following the investigation, his group had recommendations for improving our operations. The Troyer group contained recommendations for strengthening the branch's fiscal rules, ensuring that the leadership receives adequate support and training, in improving transparency in decision-making and communication. Consistent with the recommendations, the branch is revising its rules, better defining leadership roles, improving training, and emphasizing much more detailed ethical expectations. To that end, in our budget request, you will see a request for additional resources for training. These training resources will be used to help staff and judges. Investigations Law Group, led by Liz Rita, conducted the second investigation. A large part of that investigation scrutinized the branch's workplace culture. ILG found the Judicial Department has a positive workplace culture, and by and large, our employees are proud to work for us. ILG also found areas for improvement. Women make up about 77% of our non-judge workforce and about 44% of our judge population. Overall, women were less positive about our culture. Most upsetting to me was learning that some of our employees did not feel comfortable reporting unacceptable behavior or workplace concerns for fear of retaliation or because they didn't believe it would be taken seriously. That is not acceptable, and we will do better. One step we're taking to address that concern is contained in our budget request. We're asking for an organizational ombudsman. An organizational ombudsman would provide a safe place for our employees to get assistance, support, and resources for workplace issues involving non-judge staff, while maintaining an independent complaint and investigation process for the Office of Judicial Discipline when a complaint concerns a judicial officer. That organizational ombudsman would act as a guide for our employees when they have concerns. A second step is to bring our HR department up to modern standards. If you read the ILG report, you'll see a reference to an Office of People and Culture. In my view, that is recommending is a modernization of our HR practices and increased support of resources for our employees and judges. In a nutshell, we want our new Office of People and Culture to be proactive, not reactive. We want an office that can help recruit, onboard efficiently and effectively, train our new employees, and provide continuous training for all employees. And importantly, proactive work around diversity, equity, and inclusion will be a significant part of this office. We are moving forward with this office not simply to implement a recommendation, but because we believe it's the right thing to do. How we treat our employees is of critical importance to how we best serve the public. At an even higher level, we are re-examining our mission, vision, and values as an organization, both internally and to the public we serve. This will help us move forward together and ensure that our work is tethered to what we value as an organization. In sum, we want to empower our employees and truly make the branch an excellent place to work, and one where employees will see our work as a career and not just a job. This will allow us to best serve the public. Implementation of these recommendations is not just an exercise in checking boxes. What we have learned from the investigations, from other courts, and from experts in organizational change management is that true organizational change cannot be mandated. When change comes in the form of a top-down mandate or policy, it will fail. We need every judge and employee to understand our strength and our deficiencies, our goals, and to have a voice in how we move forward. We want engagement from all employees around the state. With that goal in mind, the 7 justices decided that we needed to go to each of our courthouses and talk to our 4,000 employees and 300-plus judges, and we needed to do that in person. So we did. From September through the end of December, we divided up the state amongst the 7 of us, many times accompanied by a Court of Appeals judge. We hit the road with the goal of meeting and hearing from every judicial branch employee. And while we didn't count heads for attendance, we were largely successful. Our goals were to listen to the concerns and issues that are important to our employees and judges, and hopefully convey that we sincerely care about each and every one of them. In these discussions, we heard certain themes. Compensation is a real issue for our employees. Many of our employees are struggling financially. We have a large number of employees working 2 jobs to make ends meet. As one probation officer put it, I supervise sex offenders by day and I wait tables by night. This is also true for many of our judicial assistants. The branch has employees in every county in the state, and these compensation issues are compounded by the extremely high cost of living in many of our communities. Because we are required to have a courthouse and court operations in every county, we cannot just say it's too expensive to do business in certain parts of the state. For instance, our courthouse in Pitkin County has been understaffed by 40% for 2 years. Suffice it to say that in many parts of the state, we're simply not paying a livable wage. We're losing good employees every day to higher paying jobs. Staff turnover and training were discussed extensively. We need to do a better job of onboarding and training our staff. Failing to properly support our employees right from the start and provide continuous training can lead to frustration, performance issues, and more turnover. In the simplest of terms, frequent turnover leads to training issues, and inadequate training leads to turnover. Frankly, we heard that it is difficult to have a shared mission and culture of excellence when staff are constantly turning over. Interestingly, the investigations were not an important topic to most of our employees. While the Supreme Court has been significantly involved with the investigations for the last 2 years, our employees have just been doing their jobs while confronting COVID, inflation, remote hearings, turnover, increased demands, understaffed human resources support, and trying to make ends meet. We heard from many of our employees that what happened 3 years ago involving people who are no longer with the branch was just not important to them. And they have confidence that the right steps are being taken for our future. On the positive side, in our listening sessions, we also found that employees all around the state are deeply committed to the work of the judicial branch. I could not be prouder of our employees. The branch survived some trying times during COVID. The courts stayed open and avoided large outbreaks of COVID, and were continuing to emerge from the backlog of jury trials. Our judicial officers, court executives, clerks of court, court staff, and probation officers are frontline heroes in my eyes. They innovated, they collaborated, and they should be commended. I want to touch on 2 legislative matters that have been important to the judicial branch in our operations. I earlier referenced that we will have a 23rd judicial district. In 2020, a new law was enacted that split the current 18th judicial district into 2. Beginning in 2025, Arapahoe County will be the 18th judicial district, while Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln County will comprise the new 23rd judicial district. The law created some uncertainties in how judges in the 18th would be assigned to the new 23rd. Thankfully, with the help of Representative Weissman, Senator Gardner, Senator Fields, Senator Van Winkle, and Representative Kennedy, the legislature passed a concurrent resolution to clarify the mechanics of judge assignments. And the voters overwhelmingly approved Amendment D this past November, and that will ensure a smooth transition and no disruption in the services for the courts in the new 23rd Judicial District. Thank you to all of you for your work on that. This past summer, the legislature convened an interim committee to look at possible legislative and constitutional changes to the disciplinary process for judges in Colorado. At the end of a very thorough and lengthy process, the committee proposed 1 legislative bill and 1 concurrent resolution to amend the Constitution to change the judicial discipline process. The proposed changes improve transparency in the process, ensure due process for judges, and bring Colorado in line with modern judicial discipline systems. The legislation reflects a true bipartisan effort and are good, common sense changes. I want to thank Representative Weissman and former Representative Terry Carver for chairing the interim committee and through their leadership ensuring the process was not politicized. I also want to thank other committee members for their hard work and their dedication during this process. I want to move to something that's frequently misunderstood and overlooked, the work of our probation departments. I served as liaison justice to our probation departments for many years, and I was always bothered by the false assumptions about the work of probation. I want our probation staff to know that they are not overlooked by me or by my court. And I want to clear up any misimpressions that the public may have about the mission, work, and values of our probation officers. Our probation officers are the unsung heroes of not only the judicial branch, but of the criminal justice system. Probation remains the most cost-effective method for supervising offenders. This fiscal year, an offender incarcerated in the Department of Corrections will cost the state approximately $57,000. An offender in the Community Corrections Program, $14,000. An offender on parole, approximately $7,700. An offender on probation, by contrast, will cost the state about $1,900, a fraction of the cost of any of the alternatives. And when you consider that at any given time throughout the year, the probation department is supervising approximately 70,000 people, you can clearly understand the monetary value of our probation officers. But what they do to help clients is much more important than the monetary cost of supervision. I want to emphasize, probation is not punishment. Probation is intended to rehabilitate an offender, reintegrate them in the community, and provide tools to help them successfully complete a probation sentence. For my 30-plus years working in the criminal justice system, I know our probation officers want their probation clients to succeed. I have 3 stories to share that speak to the human side of probation. This fall, in the Westminster office of the 17th Judicial District in Adams County, probation officer Bill Benson was entering the men's restroom and found a man unconscious and not breathing. Bill saw drug paraphernalia on the floor. He asked the front office to call 911, and he returned to the bathroom and administered 1 dose of Narcan to the man. The man did not respond. And Bill began chest compressions. Sean Doyle next responded. The man remained unconscious. Bill then administered a 2nd dose of Narcan. Bill continued compressions, and Sean, utilizing a shield from an emergency bag, began rescue breaths. Shane Stockley arrived and immediately retrieved an automated external defibrillator, an AED. Shane and Dmitry Medoff applied the AED. The AED located a pulse, instructed responders to continue CPR, and advised against emergency shock. Bill, Sean, Shane, and Dmitry positioned the man on his side as instructed by the AED. The man began taking periodic breaths but was still unresponsive. Paramedics arrived, and soon thereafter the man regained consciousness. It was determined that he was a probationer who had overdosed on fentanyl in the bathroom. The client was transported by ambulance and survived. This group of probation officers adhered to the Narcan and first aid CPR training protocol, and their textbook response was exemplary. Simply stated, their heroic actions of these individuals saved this man's life. And in talking to the probation officers this morning, this man is now in step 3 in sobriety house and is clean and sober. In Douglas County, the 18th Judicial District, probation officer Miranda Shepard went to the waiting room of the probation department and discovered one of her clients seemingly asleep. She was not able to wake him by calling his name. After touching his arm, she got him to wake up and gave him some water. She quickly realized that her client was in distress. She notified her supervisor, Kathy Crick, of the situation. They called for help, and the client was transported to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, paramedics administered 2 doses of Narcan to save his life. It's not difficult to think what would have happened if Miranda and Kathy had waited even a few minutes to act. By Miranda and Kathy's keen observation and quick actions, they too saved that man's life. Everyone involved in these 2 situations are heroes. The final probation story is about a woman I'll call Sarah and her probation officer, Cassie Corse. Sarah grew up in a tumultuous family and began using drugs with her mother at a young age. In 2018, she was sentenced for felony drug possession. She was placed on probation, and at that time, she was using illegal drugs and alcohol. She had a young son, and she was in an abusive relationship with her husband. Initially, she tried outpatient treatment, but she continued to use drugs. She was then referred to a short-term intensive residential treatment program. She was discharged, however, because she was suicidal. The situation with her husband continued to escalate, and Human Services became involved. Her son was eventually placed in foster care. Her probation officer and Human Services then worked together to get Sarah back on track. Despite the team effort, Sarah's probation was revoked and ultimately re-granted, meaning she was given another chance to succeed on probation instead of going to prison. This was the third time she'd been granted probation. Her probation officer and caseworker were able to get her into sobriety house, where she was prescribed and regularly took her mental health medication, received medically assisted treatment called Suboxone, and became involved in Narcotics Anonymous meetings. Sarah finally had a positive support system around her. Despite that, she continued to have positive drug tests, and she was discharged from sobriety house. Nevertheless, Cassie, her probation officer, did not give up on her. Cassie was able to get her into a sober living house called David's House, which was paid for by probation. She continued her treatment, and something clicked for her. She eventually became the house manager. She got her son back. She stayed sober, and her probation was successfully terminated. She's now a peer support specialist at a treatment provider, and recently she wrote her probation officer. Hi, Cassie. Not sure you remember me, but this is Sarah. I'm working as a peer support specialist and working with a probation solving court. I'm still sober, 3.5 years. I have my son back and I'm doing fantastic. I really just wanted to say thank you. I really think you went above and beyond for me, and it's seriously changed my life. Between you and Child Protection Services, you saved my life. I'll be 4 years clean on May 20th. I couldn't be more thrilled with how my life has turned around. I now get to help others in their situation and their addictions, and I get to spread the word that recovery is possible. I share this story with you with the hopes that it dispels any idea that probation is anxious to revoke probation and jail their clients. Sarah repeatedly violated probation, but her probation officer did not give up on her. This story demonstrates how our probation officers are deeply committed to their clients' success. I asked Bill Benson, Sean Doyle, Shane Stockley, Dmitry Medoff, Miranda Shepard, Kathy Crick, and Casey Corse, the probation officers who were in these stories today, to join us here so I could publicly thank them for their heroism. And I ask you to join me in thanking them for their work. They're up there. Thank you. We've been working extremely hard as a branch to diversify our bench. Our efforts have caused other judicial departments around the nation to look to us for guidance. As a result, Justice Marquez was invited to speak to Congress. As Justice Marquez testified at a congressional hearing in 2021, property, livelihoods, reputations, family relationships, or even life and liberty can be on the line for the litigants. A litigant who has confidence that the judge deciding her case has some sense of her life experience, eases some of that stress and enhances her trust in the decision that will be rendered fair, even if the judge ultimately rules against her. As we head into the third year of our Judicial Diversity Outreach Program, we're seeing its positive impact. As I mentioned at the beginning, we gathered in person for the Judicial Conference last fall. It was the first time since 2019. The room looked and felt differently. We saw more women and more diverse colleagues among us. And as I look out today, I see a legislature that has more women than men and so diverse. I imagine that you all know the feeling I'm describing. Diverse law students entering the law profession have shared with us how inspiring it is to see judges who look like them. Today, 17% of judges on the Colorado State Court bench are of color, whereas we only had 10% judges of color 4 years ago. More strikingly, in 2018, we had 1 black district court judge serving in our state. Today we have 15 black judges, 19 including Denver County Court. This progress has been possible through the collective efforts of many. Thanks to the efforts of our broader legal community, the diligence of our citizen nominating commissions, and the thoughtful appointments by Governor Polis, who incidentally has now appointed more than 40% of all state court judges in Colorado, our bench today will better reflect the many diverse communities across the state we serve. Initiatives such as the Dream Team 2.0 coaching program and the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association's Judicial Task Force help develop viable judicial candidates for judicial vacancies and provide invaluable services to diverse and first-time judicial applicants. Our pipeline efforts extend to college and law students who will be tomorrow's lawyers and judges. Many of our judges serve as mentors in the Law School Yes We Can program led by Executive Director Dr. Kimberly Jackson Butler, which helps diverse college students prepare for law school through networking opportunities, leadership training, and LSAT preparation. We provide experiential learning opportunities for diverse law students through our Judge Lorenzo Marcus internship program and offer networking opportunities with our judges through the popular virtual coffee house called Java with Justices. We also encourage diverse law students to consider legal opportunities in parts of Greater Colorado through a new summer externship program. We're able to invest in these important programs because you, the legislature, recognized the need and empowered us to do more. Thank you again for creating the Judicial Diversity Program that's the first of its kind in the nation. It is making a difference, and so do you. I want to recognize that this legislature is the second in the nation to have a majority of women in the legislature at this time. This work is so important, and our work continues. Now we must accelerate the work of fostering inclusion and well-being into the workplace to ensure that all of our employees, judges, and staff have the training and support they need to flourish. To solidify the foundational work that we have done, we're now asking the legislature to help us create a lasting legacy in true transformative change. I started out talking about our judges' why. To me, that's the most fundamental question of who we are as judges. I want to share with you the justices' why. I think it's important for all of you to know who we are and why we are committed to seeing the changes that we have started through to completion. I'll start with our most senior justice and our next Chief Justice, Monica Marcus. Justice Marcus's family roots lie deep in the San Luis Valley. She grew up on the Western Slope and graduated from Grand Junction High School. All her life, she's felt a call to serve. After college, she joined the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, where she worked as a teacher and community organizer in Camden, New Jersey, and West Philadelphia. Her multi-year immersion experience as a Jesuit volunteer exposed her to the complexities of urban poverty and inspired her to go to law school. Early in her legal career, that same call to service drew her to the Colorado Attorney General's office, where she worked under Ken Salazar and John Suthers, both of whom cultivated in her a deep respect for the workings of state government and the Colorado state court system. Over time, she discovered what she loved most about her work was figuring out the right answer to a legal question, the answer that reflected a commitment to the rule of law, not a particular outcome in a given case. Her call to serve has continued in her role as justice. She loves the work of solving complex legal issues. She is devoted to state government, and each day for her is both a gift and an opportunity to serve all of the people of Colorado in its many diverse communities. Justice Will Hood, after spending many years pounding his fists on both sides of the aisle as a trial lawyer in civil and criminal cases, Justice Hood was drawn to the idea of becoming the neutral in the courtroom. He describes himself as a devoted law nerd who has always enjoyed legal research and writing more than just arguing facts. Becoming a trial judge in Denver gave him the opportunity to be a neutral law nerd, focused on getting what seemed to be the correct answers to legal problems rather than simply arguing one side or another. He likes the view of the Capitol from our courthouse across the street because it reminds him of how those of us in state government work together to give life to the rule of law, which he sees as the glue that binds our society together. He values and respects the role that you play as our elected officials in creating the laws that the governor's executive agencies then work hard to implement and enforce. He enjoys being part of a nonpartisan judiciary that strives to resolve disputes by honoring legislative intent and constitutional requirements. Justice Rich Gabriel. Justice Gabriel is of the first generation in his family to go to college. In growing up, money was always a struggle for his family. He did not think he'd be able to afford to attend any top-flight schools, but he was blessed with teachers who encouraged him. They told him that good schools would offer support to students who deserved it and needed it, and they pushed him to dream big. Fortunately, he listened, and he attended very good schools with the help of massive financial aid. After graduating law school and clerking for a federal judge, he began his career working for large, prestigious law firms, first in New York and then in Denver. He never forgot, however, where he came from. And because he received so much from the practice of law, he always felt a strong moral obligation to give back. So throughout his time in practice, he served on many nonprofit boards and as a municipal prosecutor. He served hundreds of hours of pro bono service, representing abused and neglected children for almost 20 years, an Oklahoma death row inmate for 9 years. Prison inmates referred to him by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and civil rights litigants referred to him by the ACLU, among others. It was this sense of obligation to give back that ultimately led him to the bench. His thought being that there can be no higher calling for a trial lawyer and no greater way to give back than to be a judge. And so he applied and was fortunate enough to be appointed first to the Colorado Court of Appeals and then to this current court. It has been and continues to be the honor and privilege of his life to get to serve the people of Colorado as a judicial officer. Justice Melissa Hart. Justice Hart has been passionate about civil access to justice, making the legal system accessible, understandable, and fair for civil litigants, regardless of their economic status, for as long as she's been a lawyer. She realized, in part through her teaching legal ethics for 2 decades, that the state Supreme Courts have a central role in protecting and promoting access to justice through the regulation of the legal system and the practice of law. She decided she wanted to be a member of the Colorado Supreme Court if given the opportunity, so she could advocate for a focus on the needs of poor people in the civil justice system, in the importance of making the system work for those who have to navigate the law without lawyers. She loves the part of the job that involves studying hard legal questions and providing clear answers through written opinions. The black robes parts of the job, she describes. But what inspired her to seek out this role was behind-the-scenes administration of the work of the courts and the aim at being the best in serving the public. Justice Carlos Zamor. Justice Zamor was born and raised in El Salvador. He and his family fled El Salvador when he was 13 years old during a time of political upheaval. Years earlier, Justice Zamor's father had been ousted from his judicial position and their family home riddled with bullets because he stood by his conviction to faithfully apply the law in a murder case, despite pressure from a high-ranking military official to do otherwise. One night, when the family received an anonymous death threat, they immediately packed what they could fit in their van and left for the capital to apply for visas to come to the United States. A week later, with all the necessary paperwork in hand, they made the 5-day journey to Colorado. When they arrived here, they slept on a relative's basement floor until they could find housing. They could not speak English, were in culture shock, and did not have access to most of their possessions or savings. The situation in El Salvador continued to deteriorate, and they decided to apply for and later obtained their permanent residency and eventually their citizenship in the United States. This ordeal taught Justice Zamor firsthand about the perils that ensue when the judiciary is improperly used as a vehicle for personal or political gain, and left him with a profound respect for the rule of law and the sacred role that a fair, impartial, and independent judiciary plays in a democratic society. His family unplanned departure from El Salvador, along with his father's heroism, inspired Justice Zamor to become a judicial officer and fight for a system of equal and impartial justice. Justice Birkenkotter. She knew she wanted to be a judge from the time she was in the 3rd grade, which is a little unusual because she didn't know any judges or lawyers, and they didn't even have a TV, so it's hard to know where she got the idea or even thought what it meant to be a judge. As time passed and she grew to understand that trial judges help people resolve their disputes, she was hooked. After being appointed to the Boulder District Court in 2006, she was delighted and more than a little relieved to learn that her 3rd grade self had set her on a path to the best and hardest job she ever had. During her time as a trial court judge and chief judge in Boulder, Justice Birkenkotter had the opportunity to work with her colleagues and stakeholders in the 20th Judicial District to modernize and streamline many of the court's practices. There are many reasons why Maria wanted to join our court: to preserve the rule of law, to serve the entire state in the midst of the turmoil caused by the pandemic, and to work with our court and staff and judges from across the state to modernize the branch. She knew from her time as a chief judge that effecting certain statewide changes could help not only people who work in our courts, but also the people we serve. For the past 6 months, that's meant working with her colleagues to examine the needs of the districts in order to intentionally shape our priorities in directing the implementation of the various recommendations in the ILG and Troyer reports. As for myself, I've shared this story before, but it is my why. I've always known that I wanted to be a lawyer. My dad was a lawyer, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. Being a judge was never the plan, but that changed when I was a young lawyer. I was trying a serious case, and I had a judge treat me very intemperately. And I remember thinking that even if the judge was right on the law, there was a better way to handle that situation. That was the first day I thought about becoming a judge. A few years later, I had another experience that cemented that desire. I prosecuted a murder case that dragged on for about 2 years due to the defendant's significant mental health issues. Ultimately, the jury convicted the defendant of first-degree murder, and as a result, the only option available to the judge was life in prison. I should note that this took place before the Victims' Rights Act was enacted. When I asked the judge if the victim's family could speak prior to sentencing, the judge, who happened to be an excellent judge, unfortunately denied the request. He said the court didn't have any discretion regarding the sentencing, and it didn't make a difference. I'll never forget the faces of the victim's family. They had waited 2 years to talk about the victim, and they never got the chance. That day, I decided I wanted to become a judge, and I promised myself that that ever happened, I would do everything in my power to let people know that I cared and that I truly listened. A few years later, I was appointed to the district court in Jefferson County. That was 23 years ago. In treating everyone with dignity and respect to the very best of my ability has been the cornerstone of my judicial philosophy, and becoming Chief Justice didn't change that. I thought it was important for you to hear about the 7 of us. I'm proud to serve with each one of them. While we frequently disagree on the legal issues that come before us, we are one mind in our dedication to the branch. We are the leaders of the branch, and we are committed to our emerging future. And we're lucky to have a partner in our state court administrator, Stephen Vasconcellos. Stephen is the right person for the job at the right time. He's a transformational leader, and he's committed to our vision. It's a shared vision. I'm not here today to declare mission accomplished, but I am here today to say that we have a vision and a plan. And let me remind you of our strategic priorities. We're improving our operations to better serve Colorado. We're empowering our employees, and we're listening to all our stakeholders. There remains work to be done, but we have a path forward to which we are committed. 2 years ago, I committed to the idea that we would think anew and act anew, and we have lived up to that commitment. With your help, we will continue that work. The last 2 years have not been easy, but it has also been a time where leadership has been presented with opportunity. Honestly, the difficulties have allowed us to really examine how we work and who we are. We are in a much better place than we were 2 years ago at this time, and because of the lessons we learned, I'm here to tell you our future is bright. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you, Chief Justice Boatwright. The committee may now escort the Chief Justice from the chamber. Majority Leader Duran.
Mr. President, I move that the message from the Chief Justice be printed in the House Journal.
If there is no objection, the Chief Justice's message will be printed in the House Journal. Majority Leader Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the joint session be dissolved.
There being no objection to Majority Leader Moreno's motion, the joint session is dissolved.
Members, the House will come back to order. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that Senate Joint Resolution 2 be laid over until Wednesday, January 18th.
Seeing no objection, Senate Joint Resolution 2 will be laid over until Wednesday, January 18th. Announcements and introductions, folks. Announcements and introductions. Representative Kipp.
The Energy and Environment Committee has a SMART Act beginning at 1:30 in the old Supreme Court chambers. For anybody who doesn't know where that is, that's like right over there. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Kipp. Representative Froelich.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The fabulous Transportation, Housing, Local Government Committee has the delight to have back-to-back SMART hearings on Tuesday, starting at 1:30 and continuing at 3, Old State Library.
Thank you. Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you. The really smart educational SMART hearings will be held at 1:30 today in the library. See you there.
Assistant Majority Leader Bacon.
Hello, members. I just wanted to make an announcement as well on behalf of the Black Caucus. Believe it or not, we too...
Members, if I could have your attention, please.
Sorry. Thank
Members,
you.
please keep it quiet in the chamber. Thank you. Assistant Majority Leader Bacon.
Thank you. I just wanted to make an announcement to further invite everyone to the stock show. As you may or may not know, there is an African American rodeo on Monday on Dr. King's holiday. It is the Picket Rodeo, so we are inviting you all to come if you are interested. It starts at 6 o'clock. The Black Caucus will be there at 5:30, and so we'd love to see you there.
Thank you. Representative McCormick. And
Thank-
Representative Cantlett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And yes, I am up here again to remind you of the junior livestock sale that will be later this month, that we as a body are collecting funds to help one or more young livestock.
Members, can I please have your attention at the well? Thank you.
Anyway, these funds are to help usually more than one person that has raised an animal for auction be the recipient of a really great prize. And so we continue to encourage you to bring us funds, Representative Catlin and myself, as we today, through the weekend, and all through next week, continue to collect those funds for hopefully more than one special young livestock raiser.
Representative Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an opportunity and an honor to serve with you.
It is that. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, I got an opportunity to give us an opportunity. Well, I got an opportunity. It's my word today. Opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. We have a chance to compete with the Senate. They were bragging it up over there yesterday that they would outdo us in the amount of money that they could raise. And you know, I thought, well, that's kind of good for some of you guys that are just getting here, you figure that out. But after I got to thinking about that, I thought, well, you know, that kind of bothers me. These boys think, and boys and girls think, that they're going to outdo the House of Representatives. If you feel like I feel, the House of Representatives is the leader in the state of Colorado. We will be the ones that outdo them, and we need everybody's help in this room in order to do that. Here they come. Wait a minute. That comes to my side of the aisle.
You owe me.
Wait a minute.
Remember?
What? No, I don't remember.
There were two.
I told you. Remember, she's supposed to collect more than we are, and then she's taking ours. Wow. I don't know. And as the chair of Ag, I'm beginning to wonder, Madam Speaker.
He purposely
But
came
all
to
joking
me.
aside, this is an opportunity for the House of Representatives of the state of Colorado to stand up and say, hey, we do care. We do care about these young people, and we do care about the future of agriculture. That sale will take place on the night of January the 20th. And if you want to come and be part of that delegation, please get in touch with us. We'll all go down there. We'll have a great time. We'll buy some of the best livestock in the United States and in the world And you and I will be in on that, and we will also grind it in on the Senate. Right, Senator Will?
He's not listening.
Representative McCormick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As secondly, the water seminar where all of us can go learn a little bit about how water is discussed in our state will happen. We're aiming for 12:30. It's going to be across the street in LSBA. Those of you that signed up ahead of time for a box lunch, hopefully there's a box lunch there for you. If you didn't sign up for lunch, that's okay. You can still come and listen and learn. So I hope to see many of you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representatives Luck and Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Winter.
Appreciate you, ma'am. Thank you. I'm here to promote our rural heritage and rural way of life, the National Western Stock Show. Tonight they'll be holding the Pro Rodeo at 8 p.m. Get over there and cheer on the cowboys and cowgirls. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. they'll be holding the Longhorn Cattle Drive from the South Hill to the paddock at the center. And that'll give you all some insight on what ranchers do every day as they move their cattle to market. And last but not least, Sunday is the Wild West Show at 4 p.m. And it's pretty much a throwback to what Buffalo Bill once did during his show. So I'd urge you all to go and support rural Colorado.
Thank you. Representative Luck.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also, this weekend at the stock show, excitingly, is a Stick Horse Grand Prix. Stick Horse Grand Prix. It's amazing. We hosted a stick horse gymkhana in my community because we're an equestrian community and we have a number of families who can't afford horses, but we want to keep the equestrian lifestyle alive. And so we taught everything about a horse using a stick horse. They even got their own little horseshoes there at the bottom of the pole. And so I am very, very, very supportive of all things stick horse and competition. And so I encourage you guys to go and watch those kids just have a blast as they compete on their little stick horses. I'd also like to say 2 years ago I started a tradition down here. Maybe at some point in the future I'll share with you why I started that. But I started the tradition every Friday of letting you all know the truth about yourselves in this room, which is that you are amazing, you are loved, you are worthy and adored, and I can't wait to see you again soon.
Thank you. Any additional announcements or introductions? Seeing none, Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, listen up. This is a reminder. Legislative Legal Services has asked me to remind you about the delivery of bills for next Tuesday's bill introduction deadline. Your finalized bills will be delivered to the front desk for introduction unless you ask Legal Services to deliver the bill to you instead. If you wish to have a bill delivered directly to you instead of the front desk, you must have that bill completely finalized with your legal services drafter by 5 p.m. next Monday. If you are not available to finalize your bill on Monday due to the Martin Luther King holiday, you must finalize your bill by 5 p.m. today. If your bill is delivered to you, don't forget to turn it into the front desk no later than 4:30 p.m. Tuesday afternoon. Secondly, once a bill is delivered to the front desk or to you for introduction, it should not be returned to Legal Services for changes. Please make these changes by amendment after it is introduced. Lastly, please don't return bills that are delivered for introduction to Legal Services to add co-sponsors. Co-sponsors can be added by the House front desk or enrolling room staff before your bill is sent to the printer. If you have questions about adding co-sponsors after your bill is delivered to you, please contact the House front desk staff. Thank you from our legal service staff.
Madam Majority Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I move the House stand in recess until later today.
Seeing no objection, the House will stand in recess until later today.